How are ya? Listen, sometimes there are those type of experiences, games you'll play through and slowly begin to realize that what you're witnessing is an undeniable, timeless masterpiece. If you're a Final Fantasy fan and for some reason you haven't played Final Fantasy Tactics, what are you doing, man? It is the full package, a package that delivers everything you would expect from a mainline Final Fantasy, but in a spin-off entry. A deep and complex gameplay system, a cast of mind-bogglingly real and well-written characters, a world where inequality so normalized in Ivalice society, drastic social class divide so ingrained in the system that so very frighteningly reflects our own world to this day. It is all too real. Final Fantasy Tactics: The Ivalice Chronicles, this remaster of one of the best Final Fantasy games ever, just brought this masterpiece into the modern era, and in my opinion, the definitive way to experience Final Fantasy Tactics. From fully voice-acted characters across the entire game from the same studio who brought you Final Fantasy 16. From new features and quality of life that help you keep track of characters, what's happening and where you are in the story. This remaster is the full package of an already fantastic game. There's this part of me that will always feel so upset, so sad that more people haven't experienced this game. A masterfully written story of a noble-born boy fighting against social inequality, adversity, and political oppression. A story of political intrigue where manipulation, deception, and betrayal is born out of a lust for power, out of the desire to rise from one's own weakness in a world that preys on the weak. In a world made for the powerful, using faith, religion as a weapon for personal gain. In many ways, this game is much like the newest Final Fantasy game, or should I say Final Fantasy 16 is a lot like Tactics in its themes, and why wouldn't it be? Final Fantasy 16 had many devs who worked on the original Final Fantasy Tactics and went on to work on this brand new remaster. Much of what you see in both stories beautifully tackle very similar themes, world issues. Fighting for free will change in a world where oppression is a normality. How the nobility, the higher powers in both stories feign ignorance to the consequences of their actions, all for the convenience of power, security, and comfort. Where in every nation, nobles uphold their own skewed form of morality as a way to justify their own ends, and this directly contrasts to our heroes. Characters like Ramza and Clive hold very altruistic values, but this world tests them. It challenges those values and their convictions through every moment of their lives. In both games, in both Ivalice and Valencia, they emphasize that change through altruism isn't something that will always be met with kind eyes. Not from nobility and not from a society who have grown used to this way of life, to their faiths and religions. Their fears for being punished for ever taking a stand. And while there are those who will naturally rebel for change, what I adore about these stories is that they emphasize that enacting change comes with the price. Things may get worse before they ever get better. And so what do you do when rebelling against an entire system that has been corrupt? How do you uphold your morals when every power in the world tells you you're wrong and all odds are against you? Well, when speaking about Final Fantasy Tactics, this is where our two main characters come into play, and why I believe these are two of some of the most well-written characters in the entire franchise. Ramza and Delita are two characters who are so goddamn captivating, man. Both dream, have ambitions to change the established order, but their methods differ so greatly. However, it's not black and white at all. I mean, both characters are written in such a way where you can truly sympathize with their stories, their methods, and the choices that they make. Ramza is someone with unwavering conviction and resolve, that altruistic nature to fight for the little guy regardless of your origin or upbringing, regardless of name. That despite years of pain, years of wandering, suffering, revelations, Ramza's opposition to the church and his ideals he retains in response to all the injustice witnessed, it's really a state of mind that we as the viewer aspire to be, the ideal state of mind, the ideal hero. However, on the flip side, Delita is someone who will do anything from deception to murder to achieve the same goals, to enact change. And yet, even though Delita's methods could be seen as villainous and wicked, I'd argue that put in the same shoes in this type of world, that his methods seem more realistic in comparison to the morally right or high road approach that Ramza's path takes. Delita is a low-born citizen only spared the injustice of those just like him simply because nobility took him and his sister in. And yet, despite the special upbringing, he couldn't escape the cruelty of nobility. There is a clear difference in character between Ramza and Delita presented very early in the story, where in a moment of helplessness, Delita expresses that no amount of endeavor will be able to save the people he loves. Because of his low-born status, there are things far out of his reach. That unlike Ramza, Delita doesn't have the convenience of forming armies or making the big shots when the situation needs it. This scene beautifully establishes two characters with very similar goals but ultimately different methods and views of their situations. Where Ramza would tackle injustice with truth and seek to find the best means of action based on what is inherently right or wrong, Delita stands by the ethic of consequentialism, this idea that the ends justify the means. If he can bring about change to a flawed system through deception and manipulation, really any method to gain the upper hand against those more powerful than him, he will do so without a second thought, even if his childhood friend were to stand against him. But it's, as I said before, even though Delita is wicked in method, you can't help but understand him completely. After all, this is a world made for the rich and powerful, and unfortunately, that reflects our own world too. History is controlled, skewed by those more powerful than us to fit their own convenient narrative. In Final Fantasy Tactics, we see this firsthand with the scriptures of Germanique of the Church of Glabados, how they would manipulate history all to popularize their religion. We see it in the beginning of the game when both Ramza and Delita are introduced to us as history's heroes. Even though we are shown that Ramza was the moral hero, the true unsung hero, that history only ever remembers Delita Hyrule as the savior of Ivalice. Something that, again, our history is all too guilty of as well. Countless political, religious figures that are hailed as heroes, saviors. But the road they walked to achieve such goals and status probably wasn't a pretty nor clean one. And as the Chronicles of Ivalice would describe it, even though Delita was the one to be recognized for his deeds, go down as the savior despite his despicable methods, it was Ramza's path of truth, rewarding those who choose to be good in a world full of deceit, that would be the unsung hero of this tale. Although ironically, in the end, it would be his truth left behind in history. Final Fantasy Tactics is the epitome of what a good video game should strive to be. In my eyes, the beating heart of any Final Fantasy game is its narrative, it's its stories. If you don't got that, I'm sorry to tell you, but you just don't have a decent Final Fantasy to begin with. And Final Fantasy Tactics: The Ivalice Chronicles is an absolutely brilliant remaster of a classic, of what it means to fight inequality, adversity, oppression, when every power is stacked up against you, where faith can ground people in their truths, deceive them into a false way of life, or give them hope for better or worse. But perhaps what Final Fantasy Tactics gives us in the end is that faith can be the catalyst that can either destroy or save you, give you purpose. And perhaps in the end, it can be that same faith that can lead to your own truth.